assets. Now, in 2009, it spent over £500,000 on 12 members of staff. Now, we could average that out, but what's really interesting is that in 2008, 3 of those members of staff earned between £70,000 and £80,000, but a year later, 1 member of staff was earning between £80,000 and £90,000, a further member of staff was earning between £90,000 and £100,000, and a third member of staff was earning between £110,000 and £120,000. At the same time as those salaries were reported, the charity said that its cash at bank total was £38,130,695. Now, I can break this down further into £11.5 million, or just over, in unrestricted funds to meet the ongoing needs of the charity. Have we tested what potential recoup there could be for that type of money? Amounts held against actual and contingent future leasing costs of the property, over £22 million. This type of potential revenue certainly needs to be probed and tested, because in comparison to some of the other pressures that are on this budget, these are not insignificant funds. And I, for one, and my party colleagues would like to know, if there's money down there, will we test it and will we go after it? Because when only £20 million can be made available for a hardship fund, which is going to affect the most impoverished and vulnerable people in our society as a result of welfare cuts, we need to make sure that money isn't lying in a bank doing nothing productive for this society when it could be helping very, very vulnerable people. Not far from the Odyssey, of course, is Belfast Harbour. And there has been some discussion both today and yesterday about the harbour and about a proposal that we mooted in the aforementioned document from April 2009 to yield value out of Belfast Harbour. Now, the Minister for Finance seems to be a bit more open now and pursuing monies from the harbour. But in 2009, his party colleague and the current Environment Minister, Edwin Poots, responded to our call in New Priorities to go after some money held by Belfast Harbour for wider public benefit by saying that, quote, "Given that the Port of Belfast is a key part of our infrastructure, it would not be wise to prevent its progress by taking resources away from it." Last night, the Finance Minister said that under the existing rules, projects may attract money from the Harbour Commissioners. If that is not possible, we have 2 years to change the law. So the Minister now seems to have bought into the idea that it's a good idea. The question I have for the current Minister for the Environment is, why did he not realise it was a good idea 2 years ago if it's a good idea today? And perhaps, of course, there could be a disagreement between him and the current Finance Minister. Maybe the Finance Minister can tell us if he has discussed it with the other Minister and his party colleague. But there's a further issue here when I talk about lost opportunities, and it is this, that the Finance Minister is now talking about writing in 2 years to this budget process if there is a legislative requirement to change the statute in order to take money out of Belfast Harbour. The obvious point is that if that decision had been taken when we first mooted it 22 months ago, we would only be 2 months away from being able to yield that money. Unfortunately, that's another lost opportunity. Mr Farry from the Alliance Party earlier on talked about north-south and the potential for it, and he hit on very many useful points because there is massive potential there without any potential hindrance or hurt to anybody's political ideology or national identity or any other consideration for mutually beneficial cooperation between these two parts of the island. Of course, many of the things that are being discussed in this House are in themselves cross-border projects. The A5 and the A8 are cross-border projects instigated under the direct rule period. The radiotherapy centre at Altnagelvin is a cross-border capital project, and in both of those cases they are beneficial to people on both sides of the border, but they are just the start of what is potentially possible. You know, there could be much more shared procurement, many more shared services, and particularly in areas like health, very many more shared specialisms in trying to secure and develop world-class expertise on this island. Unfortunately, while a scoping study was done on the potential for further collaboration and cooperation in health and social care between North and South, we still await publication of that document, and as far as I know, it hasn't even been discussed at Executive, although obviously ministers may correct me on that. I certainly will.
On the point of the North-South feasibility study into health services, could Mr. Speaker, the Minister in his sum-up maybe confirm to the House whether or not he has had sight of this document, which of course does make 37 recommendations, many of which are for efficiencies in procurement, in service planning, in capital planning, in treatment services on a cross-border basis, particularly in the border counties, it has to be said, but also between the two major cities of Dublin and Belfast. And so, Mr. Speaker, through yourself and thanking Mr. Callaghan for giving way, could the Minister maybe in his sum-up confirm to the House whether he has sight of this, and if he has, whether he in fact thinks it's the sort of common sense approach in line with the conversations he's been having recently with the former Minister, or still current Minister for Finance in the Republic of Ireland, Brian Lennon, and I'm sure he'd wish to have with the next Minister for Finance in the Republic of Ireland.
I thank the member for his intervention. It seems that telepathy is one of his attributes, because that was precisely a request that I was going to put to the Finance Minister, and I certainly look forward to hearing his response in his conclusion. It almost goes without saying, given what I've already articulated about the A5 and A8, that transport in its broadest sense is an area in which there could be much better cooperation, not only in terms of joint services, but, as I say, in terms of joint procurement, sharing of expertise and experience on both sides of the border, and various other things. I think in the business community is also hungry for there to be further cooperation between the two administrations, because they see a lot of duplication, a lot of red tape for companies and sole traders doing business in both parts of the island, and particularly, though not exclusively, along the border corridor. And I know from my own constituency experience that that is a particular issue for many family firms in the northwest, and I'm sure in other parts of the border corridor, where people may have 2 or 3 shops or 2 or 3 small manufacturing facilities or whatever, one on either side of the border or in whatever quantums. And they face various difficulties in terms of dealing with 2 different systems and whatnot else, some of which cannot be dealt with by this Assembly, that is true, but many of which can, and I think that's something that we could usefully try to address somewhat better. I think people in Derry and surrounding areas are also keen to further our own particular sub-regional issues, and I'm particularly mindful there of the North West Gateway Initiative, and it certainly seems to me and my party that a North West Gateway Fund, with money contributed by both the Dublin administration and the Belfast administration, would be a very useful way of addressing some of the particular issues faced by our own particular part of the country. Unfortunately, this budget is strong on one thing, and that is reinforcing the silo mentality which continually fails our constituencies and our communities right across this region. A North West Gateway Fund would be one way of addressing that, and as Mr Beggs has mentioned on a number of occasions today, there are other areas in which cross-cutting funds would be very helpful. The Children's Fund was a very productive and precise way of dealing with many of the issues which affected children and young people across the range of different departments' respective responsibilities. It was abolished, but really hasn't been replaced in any authoritative and comprehensive way. Some departments, to be fair, for example, the Department of Health, while it may have failings in other areas, did step up to the plate in a particular way in comparison to other departments. But many of the promises that were made then, that similar monies would be available but just divvied up through departmental channels, have not been fulfilled and have not been lived up to. And, on the point of cross-cutting departmental approaches, I think what every member of this House should consider is this, and it is that allocating money through the traditional departmental approach largely serves the interests of the system, whereas allocating money to funds which then are subject to bids coming up from the grassroots better serve our constituencies and our communities, because they can cooperate and develop their own partnerships, and they are better placed to know what their own needs and requirements are. And I think that it would be useful to have a cultural change from what is in this budget and move back towards a cross-cutting model, at least in part, because that undoubtedly leads to better outcomes. And, when one thinks of the issues around healthcare, and there's been so much talk of health in the context of this budgetary debate, an obvious point, I think it was mentioned on the radio today, was the issue of obesity and the challenges that is going to bring ever more. While it already is an issue, it's going to be more and more of an issue given the number of overweight and obese children that we have, as well as adults. It will become a huge drain on the health system, and it would also have all sorts of other effects, not just in terms of physical health, but mental health and across a whole stream of other activities and across society. And obesity would be an area ideally addressed through a cross-cutting approach, because while clearly aspects of that must be addressed through health, other aspects of it could be usefully addressed through education and various other means. So I think that we need to move beyond the platitudes of saying that government is working well to actually making government deliver better. Speaking of funding and of funds, I want to turn now to the issue of the Social Investment Fund, which is a bit of an Orwellian description, I think,